So, yeah, we're going to the second last talk of the day. Mila Waldeck is going to be on stage soon. Mila, she did a master in Reading. And then you say, oh, it's another typeface designer from Reading. But actually not. Mila, she studied the master in research over there, as some of you may be aware of. And she also did the PhD in Reading. And now, now the Reading, yeah. But I think that's important for the presentation she's delivering tonight. That is about research in design and typography as well. So it's a different angle, but it's also a very important one that sometimes doesn't get too much opportunities on the stage. And Mila is now teaching at the University of Westminster and the graphic design course. So, and also, last remark, Mila is also a great art director of magazines. She didn't put that in the, but she is. And so, Mila, the stage is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Just a warning here on the screen. I'm going to start my presentation from the title. The machine can do everything. It has no law of its own. This was written by Jan Tschichold in 1946. And it's part of one of the epic debates about typography in the history of typography, which is known as the dispute between Max Bill and Jan Tschichold. There is a fascinating literature about it, and in the broader passage, Jan Tschichold writes, Max Bill's typographic work today, like my own work between 1924 and around 1936, is marked by a naive overestimation of so-called technical progress. Anyone who works like this sees in the machine-generated manufacture of consumer goods, surely a feature of our times, something exceptionally delightful. We cannot escape making and using such things, but it's not acceptable to worship them just because they emerge non-stop, exploiting the latest rationalized methods. The machine can do everything, it has no law of its own, and cannot give birth to anything by itself. It is the will of man, the creator, that shapes its products, even when he believes to be following its laws. So yeah, that's my presentation. The machine can do everything, it has no law of its own, and I'd like to thank Hans Heister and Felix Widler. And these are the two covers of the dispute between Max Bill and Jan Tschichold. The first article was written by Max Bill, and it was published in May 1946 in the 5th issue. Max Bill is a Swiss architect, artist, and designer. And in the following issue in June, came Jan Tschichold's reply by the German type designer, graphic designer, and theorist Jan Tschichold. The date of the dispute is itself a matter of dispute. Some scholars argue that actually Max Bill's article was published in April and Tschichold's reply came in June. But Felix Widler sent me the scanned version of his magazine. I'm based in England. I wasn't able to find Max Bill's original, but thanks to Felix Widler, he also sent me a description of the magazine. I think we can safely say that it was published in May. The great journal Typography papers from the University of Reading and also Hugo Boshart, scholar of the dispute, they argue that it was published in April. And I think it's probably because it's so hard to find the original of Max Bill's article. And this is relevant because it invites us to see a hidden participant, to pay attention to a hidden participant. In the dispute, it's Rudolf Hostetler. He was the editor of the magazine Schweizer Graphische Mitteilungen, where the dispute was published. And maybe he was working behind the scenes in contact with Tschichold, which could have speeded the process. And maybe he was a hidden character. Hostetler became editor-in-chief of Typographisches Monatblätter. In 1952, the Typographische Monatblätter joined Schweizer Graphische Mitteilungen, and Hostetler became editor-in-chief until 1981. So he was probably someone that contributed to make debate and to disseminate Swiss typography, but also to disseminate a critique of Swiss typography, which is what we see in the dispute between Max Bill and Jan Tschichold. So here it is. On the left is Max Bill's layout. He designed the layout of his own article. Everything is set in lowercase, and the body text is printed in gray instead of black. On the right is Jan Tschichold's reply, Belief and Reality, and it just follows the layout of the magazine. So, right in the beginning, Max Bill writes, recently one of the well-known theorists of typography declared that the new typography, which from around 1925 to 1933 enjoyed growing popularity in Germany, was used primarily for advertising matter, and that today it is old-fashioned. For the design of normal printed matter such as books, and especially for literary works, it is inappropriate and should be rejected. So from the beginning, from this introduction, it would seem like Max Bill would write about legibility, which is kind of the topic that is raised, but instead, he writes soon afterwards, we know above all in architecture those tendencies that, instead of following progressive knowledge and developing architecture further, sought decorative solutions and opened themselves to every reactionary endeavor, the most distinctive of which we'll know all too well by the term Heimatstil. And I will talk about this word, and I will focus on the word Heimatstil in my presentation. At no point Max Bill mentioned the name of Jan Tschichold, but just from the description, well-known theorist of modernist typography, it was clear that he was talking about Jan Tschichold. And the word Heimatstil was also clear for the readers at that time that it was related to the Nazi ideology. So Jan Tschichold, what is implicit in Max Bill's article, Max Bill doesn't mention the Nazi regime, but Jan Tschichold, in his reply, he makes everything more explicit, and he writes, the Third Reich promoted technical progress like no other in its war preparations, which nevertheless it hypocritically hid behind propaganda for medieval forms of society and expression. This is just to show, to give a context. In 1925, Jan Tschichold published an issue of the magazine Typographische Mitteilungen, and it was a huge magazine at the time. The print run was 20,000 copies. It had a broad readership, and on the left and on the center, you can see the normal design of Typographische Mitteilungen. Jan Tschichold designed it and edited the October issue, which you see on the right. And when we see the magazine, the whole year, it is shocking. It is shocking. When you only see Jan Tschichold's image, we don't feel that. But when you see the whole sequence, it is shocking, and it was probably very influential, and it was probably shocking at the time as well. And these are two other pages with Jan Tschichold's design. So yeah, that was 1925. But around the same time in Germany, movement. There was a movement that had a growing popularity, and it was the movement related to what Max Bill calls Hamite stew. Hamite is it has a nationalist connotation. It means homeland, and the movement related to Hamite stew was one of the main leaders was Paul Schutz-Naumburg, and the whole idea was that the German people had an inherent connection with the German land and had an inherent way of making things and building things, and an inherent culture, let's say, and this is the typical Hamite stew architecture. And this is another typical Hamite stew architecture and landscape. And here we see on the left the Hamite stew architecture and landscape as well in the Nazi women's magazine. And in the center is another cover of the Nazi women's magazine of the Nazi party, and there was a very strong racial connotation, as we can see here from a quote by Paul Schutz-Naumburg. Does every people win as far as it is in some way racially homogeneous, or derives its physiognomy from a particularly creative race, knows that its houses have a particular physiognomy. So there was a strong racial connotation that was linked to part of the Nazi ideology, which is the blood and soil ideology. Walter Dahe was a top Nazi leader, and he wrote the book The New Nobility of Blood and Soil at Paul Schutz-Naumburg's house. So there was indeed a strong link between the two things. And at the same time that there was this side of the Nazi ideology, there was another side. On the right is the Nazi newspaper Völkischer Beobachter. And it's really different from the design of newspapers at the time. This was 1941. However, it is similar to the graphic design of Jan Tschichold in 1925, the modernist graphic design. There is a similarity, so that side of the Nazi ideology was happening at the same time. And this is another publication of the Nazi Party. This is from 1936, and it was published during the Olympic Games. And it is similar to the kind of typography that Max Bill was advocating. And this is another spread from the same publication. We can see here the modernist motif, the kind of theme, and also the kind of photography. So yes, modernism was part of the Nazi aesthetics. And this is a building built during the Nazi regime. And it also has a modernist spirits, let's say. So what we see in typography was also happening in architecture. But there was a sense of confrontation between Hamite stew and modernism, and this is explained by the architectural historian Ian White. And he writes, in the years of the Weimar Republic, the architectural debate in Germany became a battleground between the conservatives of the Hamite Schutz and the modernists. The symbolic epicenter of the struggle was the roof, pitched and Germanic for the former, flat for the latter. And the Bauhaus building here is flat, and you can see on the top left the pitched roof. And on the right is a building by Albert Speer, one of the main architects of the Nazi regime. And this is the kind of architecture that represented the Nazi power, it was symbolic representation of power. And he used a neoclassic kind of style with modernist accent, let's say, in the flat roof. At one point, Max Bill accuses Jan Tschichold of doing Heimatsstil typography. And Jan Tschichold says, I'm not friend of Hamite steel. The traditional typography I'm defending here is not Hamite steel. There is probably something similar. And we already called Rudolf Koch and his disciples' efforts, which ended in Marathon, a national park in Germany. This also includes Post-Antiquate and Fracture, and 3 levels lower, the Gothic bastards, fonts of the Third Reich, Tannenberg, Deutschland, National. I can't stand these types. They arise from a reversal of the religiously colored belief in progress that Bill represents, namely, a sentimental escape into the irretrievable past. By the way, they are also modern. And this is what Tschichold was writing about, the typographic Hamite steel that Tschichold describes. Here is Post-Antiqua, Marathon, Koch Fracture, Tannenberg, and Deutschland, and a Hamite steel architecture on the left. So there was one side of the Nazi ideology, which was the blood and soil ideology. This is a page of the women's magazine NS Frauenwarte. And yes, there was this kind of typographic Hamite steel, and it was related to a stereotypical representation of craftsmanship as well. But at the same time, there was another side of the Nazi ideology, which was the ideology of Aryan racial supremacy. And according to the ideology of Aryan racial supremacy, the Aryan race, which was the Germanic race, was a superior race, more intelligent, always bringing progress and technological development to the world, and always more advanced from the technological point of view than the other races. And this is another building by Albert Speer. This is a spread from a book published by and for the SS Schutzstaffel. And here is the schematic representation of the racist ideology of the Nazi regime. And the caption here says, does the same soul dwell in these differing bodies? On the left is the Aryan race, and on the right it is not. And from this image we can see the two kinds of Nazi ideology and how it is translated photographically. So on the left is the male figure, which is a higher supremacy. It is related to an attitude, we can see from the photograph, an attitude of forward-looking progress, modernity and modernism, and modernized classicism and neoclassicism. On the right is the female representation, which you can see it's more like blood and soil, more rural, and it's more related to women, which was the lower rank of the Aryan race. And on the top right is Futura. It is Futura, and it was the typeface that was speaking to the Schutzstaffel, to the SS. And Max Bill, at some point, he writes, Hamite steel advocates have been taken in by skillful cultural propaganda, becoming exponents of an approach that, politically above all, has led to disaster. Nothing could be more wrong than to encourage today the satellites of that progress in the intellectual field, instead of denying them the right to defame those who have resisted in the intellectual and artistic field. Max Bill was a student at the Bauhaus. He was part of, his perspective was the Bauhaus perspective. And this is one of the few passages that also hints that he was talking about Nazism. The year was 1946, so it was a recent memory. And Jan Tschichold, in his reply, he writes, an artist like Bill may not realize the sacrifices in blood and tears that the application of rationalized methods, production methods, costs to civilized humanity and to each individual worker. So throughout his text, he says, yes, there was the Hamite steel typography, but there is also something different and which is closer to modernism than the modernists would like to acknowledge. Now I have to say that I would never thought I would be talking about this dispute focusing on this Nazi references to Nazism. I never thought that would happen, but in 2017, I saw the demonstrations in Charlottesville during the Trump administration, and I saw swastika flags next to Confederate flags. And I am Brazilian. Around the same time, Bolsonaro was president, and one of the ministers gave a speech that was actually a speech by Goebbels. And I never thought I would live to see this theme, these scenes. And I wanted to understand, as a design historian, what was happening from the point of view of design. So I started researching Nazi publications. And that's how the things I started finding in Nazi publications reminded me of the dispute between Bill and Jan Tschichold, and I started reading the dispute in a different way. I have been researching the dispute for a long time, since my major project when I was an undergraduate student. My supervisor was the Brazilian type designer, Rodolfo Capeto, and he said, Mila, I think you would like to read these two articles. And I was fascinated, and I translated into Portuguese, and my major project was about that. At that time, we didn't pay attention to the Nazi part of the dispute. It didn't seem relevant. But yes, now it is. Around the same time when I was writing and researching, writing about Nazi graphic design and researching it, I was contacted by Jackson Chiapa from Editora Papel do Mato in Brazil. It's a small publishing company, and they produce books in small editions, praising craftsmanship and using hand composition. He does preserve the metal type from Brazil, and he's cataloging, and it helps understand the history of typography in Brazil. And he also runs workshops and explains that history. And he was interested in that, and I thought, well, maybe that relates to the positive attitude to craftsmanship that Tschichold has in the dispute, but also that publisher is based in the south of Brazil, in Santa Catarina, and it's a region that has a strong neo-Nazi movement. And indeed, Jackson is very concerned about it. It's something that it's really important to him, and he wants to do something against that somehow. So I would like to finish my talk with a quote from Preston King, a historian. No present is entirely divorced from or uninfluenced by the past. And I keep thinking myself, how come we ended up where we are? How come these things are still haunting us? And also, how can typography, the history of typography, helps us understand the symbolic meaning of things that are surrounding us all the time. And thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Mila. We probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. Anybody? And now is the last day. People are getting tired, but so yeah, if you have no questions, anybody? No. So if you don't, thank you, Mila.